Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 130. Quick reminder, please follow IOH on LinkedIn and contact me if you would like to propose an episode. Our guest today is Rainer Horba, legendary/senior IAM architect. Welcome, Rainer.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Mike.
So we talked about this I think 2 or 3 months ago about doing a follow-up episode on PAM, and here it is, a
Great.
couple of months later. Um,
Yeah.
um, and so I want to start by maybe talking about there was a $25 billion acquisition of probably the market leader in PAM. So I feel like a good place to start would maybe just be to level set and say, do you have any thoughts on this deal?
Yes, well, first it's 25 billion is really a big number. And it reminds me in general what has been happening in the marketplace. So when you think about Bravo acquisitions of Ping and ForgeRock and the extensions of Savient into PAM and Okta into Okta used to be an access management company. Now they are IGA and trying to do some PAM, and there are many
Mhm.
many others as well.
And
Like one,
authorization. Okta also has open FGA.
yeah, yeah,
So
right.
yeah, every identity
So
company I think wants to become a one-stop shop
yeah,
for everything, and they sort of
so
start in one area, but then start going into adjacent markets.
yeah,
So
so
SailPoint's the same way, right?
um, as opposed to my personal experience with customers, the market analysts categorize the IAM market as something which is mature.
Uh-huh.
Um, when I see customer projects, I I see lots of things to be done, but that's another thing. And so what we are seeing in the IAM market area, this kind of consolidation and companies wanting to provide the full service, not just the full suite and not just one piece of IAM. So that seems to be going on in the general IT security as well. So Palo Alto, Cisco, Microsoft, and their peers want to cover the whole um, endpoint security, XDR, SIEM market, firewall, and I think there is a lot of potential. So, uh, particularly since we are talking about PAM today, so I think it's an old dream for architects to manage network access rules from the
How I got
same
into this, Reiner, I
governance
started in
perspective.
ISP. We actually had routers and ACLs, router access, tables. I have to say, people forget it that the network exists. Um, and let me just there's a guy, Shlomo Kramer. He's the founder of a company called Cato Networks, and I don't know a whole lot about the networking business anymore. Because I'm more identity specialist, so I don't know a lot about Palo Alto. But he made a comment that Palo Alto's acquisition of CyberArk sort of reminded him of like Big Blue of IBM, of like Palo Alto sort of starting in like the network segment and saying, well, our number one threat is actually the people and account compromise, and like we need to sort of see the extension of like network into identity. Like, yeah, like how do you think they're thinking about this?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, because in general, the whole next generation firewall technology, which is on the market since quite a couple of years, um, was working with identity. So we are far beyond the time where we just had network filters and proxies and application level proxies, like maybe 20 years ago. So when you're logging into a network protected by Palo Alto, and not only their competitors have similar things, uh, then the firewall is identifying you as a user via the IP address, MAC address, and if uh, they are talking to your Active Directory or Cloud Directory service, and they're also if you cannot identify it by an existing session from another system, then they redirect you to a capture page, like on a Wi-Fi, hotel Wi-Fi. When you log
Uh-huh.
in and don't have a session, then uh, some page comes up to identify yourself. Or yeah, so that's kind of the background. So in my view, it's
And that's
absolutely
true. By the way,
logically.
we social login. We use a service here, a VPN service here at Glue called NetBird, and
Ah,
we like them because when you connect to the network, you get redirected to OpenID Connect login. We actually log in through
mhm,
Google, even though we're an IDP company. Google's our IDP, um,
yeah.
and so yeah, we have seen a convergence of the network with the identity layer, and that was sort of always true. We had this thing called AAA accounting. Um, um,
Radius.
uh, yeah, so Radius. So part of it was authentication, I think authorization and accounting. Part of this
Yep.
is because in the ISP business, we used to bill people like when they connected, they would connect one channel or two channels depending upon their account type. And so the billing and the users were tied. Um,
Hmm.
and so traditionally, identity has been a part of the network stack. But I guess there's a lot of part identity like places where where Palo Alto could have gone. Why did they go to PAM?
Well, Palo Alto with their network stack is in the infrastructure business.
Hmm.
And if you're maintaining infrastructure, PAM is a logical extension. But I'm not sure here, so I don't know their
Yeah.
strategy paper. But I would guess that PAM is a logical extension for them. And
Well,
just well, two sentences to connect to the previous one. If you can merge the identity level protection, like we try in zero trust, and the network level protection, you will save a lot of administrative headache in large companies.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, um, CyberArk was the thing that was determining whether or not you could get into Palo Alto. So it just seemed to them like, weirdly, PAM has a lot of business value because, and this goes to my theory about PAM, where we started this conversation, where like right now, our current state is that every application is a one off for security. Like Palo Alto routers have one way. They might all use OpenID Connect for authentication. That's great. We have agreement on authentication layer, but there's some other way that you authorize in Palo Alto or manage authorization. And that's also true for Active Directory, where you might have a lot of permissions in Active Directory about who can get access to what
Mm,
folders, who's in what groups. Um, and other systems like SAP or CRM, they all have their own way that they manage security. And then you have you have a hornet's nest of homegrown applications, um, and they might have their own way that they do RBAC or ABAC. And so you end up having, as an organization, you have agreement on authentication, which is nice, but you still have, 400 one-offs for how security is managed. And then any
mhm,
CISO really can't really manage that. And so any leverage that they can get around, oh, if I could just group these 20% of the applications are 80% of my risk. And if I could just group five of these, 20%, that gives me a serious amount of operational leverage. And that's always where I saw PAM. So it has a lot of business value because it focuses down where, you have the most pain. Um, but ultimately, it's not, as a futurist, I like to think about like perfect states and how we get
mhm.
there, whereas PAM is sort of an admission that we failed, but at least it's better than our current, it's an improvement or marginal improvement on our current failure to give us a little more pragmatic, operational leverage.
Um, I don't want to disagree, but you might be.
Please
pretty far in the
disagree.
future.
Yeah.
Um, so, well, it boils down to the question, what is PAM? If we have highly secure infrastructure, it's about authorization. So I would agree with you to that. Um, in the current state of affairs, the problem is that our uh, business environment is pretty unsecure, and to make it um, usable and productive, it has to stay like that. So you can basically um, you can install. Well, you can you have your browser access the whole internet without restrictions. Um, you have Office applications, or just like take Teams. So Teams, you have a variety of plugins with practically no centralized Microsoft blast security controls and so, all, stuff like that. So, in a nutshell, to be productive in an office environment, you have to be insecure. On the other side, to manage your infrastructure, which where administrative access could have catastrophic consequences. Like so, that's the side where I'm coming from. So, critical infrastructure providers, financial services companies.
Can I ask just real quick, are we only talking about workforce here when we talk about PAM? Or are
Yes.
we ever talking about consumers or B2B partners?
No. No. Well, there is a gray zone in between. So when you're talking about workforce, you have external, but usually you have in a secure environment, you have to treat them as a workforce. You have to know who is accessing. But let's say if you have a um, follow the sun support team from SAP, and there are hundreds or thousands support guys around the globe available to support you. It's hard to onboard them in a in an HR process before they can fix critical and high priority things. So th this is a thorny issue. But usually the aside this very short term support stuff, PAM is a workflow thing.
Um, and so what do you think I don't get about PAM? Um, why don't PAM systems, or is the future of PAM systems just to adopt something like Cedar or some other type of central, um, eventually can they be a bridge to the next technology? And have they shown any interest in not just locking you into their own proprietary way of doing things?
Um, so in my view, PAM is not only a class of products; it's an architecture, and as an architecture, it won't go away anytime soon. And so, so defining what PAM is, I would say you have to start with capabilities. So compare it to um, identity management, IGA.
Hmm.
So IGA capabilities are well known. So you have all this identity management with onboarding, offboarding. You have provisioning. You have discovery of accounts and all the authorization stuff and management. So if we take the same principle of explaining capabilities to PAM, um, then we have I would say on the first capability at the top of my head is separation. So you're going from a standard business environment, which I said is pretty unsecure by definition, to a highly secure and very inconvenient environment. So you're going to a jump host or to a secure workstation, secure access administration workstation, or privileged access workstation, whatever. So, which is a very much hardened system, which may have some kind of GUI, but in principle, the functionality is reduced to the absolute minimum. And in a very futuristic way, when we are consuming SaaS services, so everybody's on Google Workplace or MS365, etc. On the SaaS level, you don't need that. But Google and Microsoft behind the scenes will very much need it, because you have to be extremely restrictive to provide access. And if you're thinking about OT, uh, same thing again. You have to be very restrictive.
So let's say I'm an application and I say I want to be CyberArk. I want to be managed by CyberArk. What sort of the process I go through to do that?
So the typical approach for CyberArk is to separate certain types of access by something called privileged session manager, which is kind of a jump box,
Uh-huh.
which we're having since many years. And the advantage of these vendors and their products is to make it very convenient. So ideally, let's say in a high-grade military environment, um, you're running your systems air-gapped. So you have a separate, well, you have a physical location, you have separate devices, and there is nothing like um, a wireless or wired connection to the
Yeah,
public network.
yeah,
But we don't have that in practice for any commercial applications outside high security things. So
right. We
there
have,
we
in
need
fact, we have
to,
cloud, which is very connected um, by lots
right,
of people. Yeah.
right,
Um,
right. So we need to define uh, whether it's just an on-premise system to up to a multi-cloud system with um, different cloud providers. You have to define um, your restricted areas
yeah,
in different levels, like levels of assurance. But we um, in privileged access management, we have uh, different levels. It's not called the level of assurance. So there is the this Microsoft stems from Active Directory. But whatever stratum layer or you have, we classify systems from um, very critically to being standard. So,
right. Like
and if you
eyes
want your
only.
yeah, right. And if you want your application managed
Well,
by
you can't make
CyberArk,
policies if you don't have some type of classification system, right?
absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
I kind of want to get back to my original question, though. I feel like we got distracted. So I'm an application developer. I'm writing a new web application. I want to do the right thing. I hear that my company is using this PAM system. So I'm like, oh, great. I want my application's access to be managed through this PAM thing. What do I do? Is there an API that I call for the PAM manager? Or how do I architect my
Hmm.
application in
Well,
such a way that I know it's going to work with the PAM?
yeah, depending on your what you particularly you're going to protect. So as an application developer, PAM is usually not a very important topic for you. So one is how is the platform managed? So it's a PaaS system. So if you're an application developer who is pushing software just on the CI/CD pipeline, and somebody else is taking care of that,
Hmm.
um, you won't be using PAM. Somebody will have to take care of secrets in your CI/CD pipeline. So CyberArk will do that. It will both scan for hard-coded credentials in some software repository, and it will inject the right credentials per staging environment into your pipeline. And then at the end of the day, you have your, let's say, application server or PaaS infrastructure. So somebody will have to manage that. So this is when CyberArk starts to play, and obviously on the infrastructure level, below that on the operating system and network level.
Where do you think, what's the best case scenario for that you've seen where you just see, okay, for this application, this makes a ton of sense and maybe it justifies the thing just by itself, whether it does anything else? Are there any killer applications for PAM?
It's never on the application level. So um, you start with your, well, one aspect is um, your ISMS. So you have an information security management system, and so you collect your assets, maybe your 400 applications, or if it's just 3, whatever, and you classify your assets, categorize them into your different criticalities and also the
Mm-hmm.
access to it, and then you decide which protection need is covered by which PAM or standard access level.
Right. And then it creates an audit log whenever there's an access. So you get a decision log of every
Yeah,
decision made.
so right. So you can even audit, for example. So one critical thing is that if you take applications like SAP Financial, for example, SAP is constructed in a way that a user you cannot do anything without causing a log entry.
Mm-hmm.
However, if somebody needs to drop and create a new table space or do certain system upgrades on your underlying database, you have to grant access which will bypass all the logging. So this is where you need a PAM, and it can log everything the engineer is doing. So banks are doing this by requirement from their regulator. So they must not allow any administrator to access, let's say, a payment system
Mm-hmm.
um, without generating a log and somebody um, doing a post-mortem analysis of the log. Or, well, that's quite automated. So they will pick certain things and check it occasionally, but there is some process behind the scenes.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. Would you say that from the business person's perspective, then the log is actually like the most important thing for the in terms of like the decision about why we actually need to get this thing, this PAM software, which is always
So
expensive.
still, I would say the isolation is the first thing. So if you cannot afford the air-gapped system, you need some kind of mixture between convenience and security. So security is in that case a jump host or a privileged session manager. The second one is, and in practice, I see these um, session logs not so frequently. So
Mm.
it's more in banking and financials, not not in the general case.
You mean session logs from um, let's say a log that this person logged in on their web browser from this time to this time.
Yes,
That's a session log versus an audit log from a PAM says this person accessed this document at this time
right.
or this with this
Yeah,
classification.
yeah.
Um,
And we must not forget that it's PAM is not only about interactive access. It's also about the um, service accounts, CID pipelines, stored secrets for cryptography, etc. So that's the other part of PAM.
um, and I was just trying. I lost my train of thought for a second. So, um, okay, um, and um, yeah, I wanted to talk about the assets and the capabilities. So,
Hmm.
um, what percentage of the assets that are under control? Let's just take an average Fortune 500 company, which I know is a big category or a big stretch, and say what percentage of the assets that are important to have a log about are actually under the control of PAM? Just like a ballpark estimate. Do you think it's like maybe 10% or maybe 50%? Just some wide estimate. Like, are they actually
But
protecting the stuff that's important?
yeah, absolutely. Um, but they are protecting um, just the administrative access. So we have to first we have to clarify that we're not talking about all application logs. It's just when the administrator, um, let's say, logs into the Azure console and changes the global administrators, stuff like that.
Right. So
And
we're right. These
this is
aren't
a very
policies for
small
normal
portion
users.
of, sorry?
So right, it's not for normal users access,
No, 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 no,
but
no.
it sounded like you were saying that there was really though that there was an inventory of assets that was taking place, and then those assets were being classified, and then the log that's created is basically probably an allow or deny um, decision. This person tried to access this asset with this classification, allowed or denied. That's the log.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm wondering the assets. So the company has like so all of the assets. I mean, I think what you're saying is that if all of the assets were under this security system, which I contend they're not, that most of
Hmm.
them aren't. It's only a small percentage of actually the assets that are inventoried for this privilege access management. And then you're saying even for those, there's only a small subset of people who we actually even look at, because most of the people, your consumers and your partners, they maybe
Hmm.
don't not even part of this system.
Yeah. So
Um,
let me clarify what kind of assets we are talking about when we're
yeah,
uh, in the context of PAM. So it's usually not your web application or your typical business service. It is your access to your firewall, to your operating systems, to your central directory, to your various cloud consoles, um,
yeah.
your certificate management system may it be in the cloud or hosted. So these are the critical or
Each of
in
those
an
are just by themselves are just applications. A dashboard is an application. A control panel is an application. A lot my Windows desktop login system, it's an application. From a policy perspective, those are all just applications. Tell me one that's special.
it's the classification. So we are not the important point is that we are not classifying the usual protection need from a business impact analysis perspective or business continuity.
Yeah,
Um, the one uh, definition which I like is that the highest level of PAM access is where you have organization-wide access decisions.
yeah.
So, but this is much bigger than you think
So
initially.
even
So
PAM has a super user.
yes, yes, it's
If
uh,
you can be the PAM super user, then you basically have access to everything.
yeah, yeah.
Or you can
Well,
grant
there are two
access to everything.
solutions. Either you're fine with this kind of self-reference, or you have a special kind of offline CA and certificate, something which is more traditional. But let's
Are you saying that Active Directory is an asset or that
yes,
VPN login is an asset?
yes, absolutely.
No.
or
Right.
service, however you
Those I
call it.
call applications. That's just an application. That's not an asset. An asset would be, okay, so an application like a banking application has data. Each record is actually an asset, I would say. Um, and so, yeah, to me, those are applications, and applications have identities, and they actually present the identities of the humans. So if I'm
Mhm.
active to Windows login, desktop login, let's say, I'm a consumer of the IDP, um, and but I also identify myself cryptographically. I say I'm the Windows, remote desktop login
Mhm.
server, and I do asymmetric authentication. And here's a user that I authenticated with FIDO, right? So from my perspective, Windows desktop login or database access, most databases are called by web APIs anyway these days, but even for the ones that are connection based, we're going to do a device flow or we're going to do some other type of authentication mechanism. Um,
Yes, but and this is the point. Um, which when you compute the level of trust, it's not just the authentication which is behind it or the identity, it's also the
mhm,
endpoint security level. So um, when you when you do your administrative access, you cannot go directly from your standard notebook to your Active Directory or
mhm.
Google Console.
Right. So there's a ceremony around the security for how this thing
Right.
gets set up so that it has
And that's a
integrity.
key feature of PAM.
Yeah.
And to
And the
make it easy,
CA also has a ceremony. Remember, we have CA signing ceremonies.
right?
You're saying this is some type of similar ceremony for a PAM?
Well, not in the ceremony of having a testimony like with a CA signing. It's more a
Uh-huh.
kind of yeah infrastructure that will that is specialized to segregate the different sections of your
Right.
infrastructure.
What do you think if do you have any thoughts on Cedar? I'm a big Cedar advocate, so maybe just I'll ask to get a background feel. Any thoughts
No,
on the topic?
sorry, no,
Uh,
haven't worked with that.
my take on this is that these PAM systems are just doing authorization, right? They're giving you a mechanism to do a certain type of authorization, but they're very sort of proprietary. None of them are general purpose, and none of them are scalable.
Hmm.
Um, and that actually the authorization needs to have a mathematical basis to be able to prove things about it. And that Cedar is the only policy syntax that has the logical capabilities to enable you to do an analysis of the policies to make statements that are provable. Um, and if you have thousands of policies, if you're an enterprise and you're going to do an upgrade to your system, and before the upgrade you had 900 policies, and after the upgrade you're going to have 1,300 policies, and you need to know, are all the websites still secure? You need your
What kind
policies
of
and some.
policies are you talking about? If you have 900
Um,
policies.
these are always park policies. So principal, action, resource, context. Can this person or piece of software do this action on this resource with this context?
Hmm.
So I think all of the auth vendors agree on this, by the way, and that's in the OpenID standard. The
Hmm.
auth also, they call it subject, not principal, but you could just say subject, principal, same thing. But then they
Yeah,
also have action,
yeah,
resource,
yeah.
context.
So
Um,
there are a few things here, particularly on uh, if you have kind of root access or super user access. Um, you, what you get is
Nobody should have super user access. There's one
this
policy that says, no,
no
this guy, Reiner, is the
no
IGA
no no
PAM
no no
administrator.
you have to bootstrap yourself into your system with the granular policies, but initially you don't have a granular the systems are not delivered with a granular policy.
Sure, there's
So
a set of
so one
provisioning.
thing is you that in many cases you're delegating um, an account, yeah, with quite static access, just in practice. Uh, and the second thing is you're providing authorization to an account to access another account. So there is this account hopping thing in PAM, which you don't have in standard identity and access management. So let's say I'm my account Rainer, and I need to access this firewall. So I don't
Hmm.
have a Rainer account on the firewall. I will have it um, to install an update, for example. Yeah. So well, maybe
There's an admin account or there's a
the
something
firewall will
account on.
have a directory, but anyway, let's keep that example. It happens in practice. So people access or locally administrator on an endpoint, a Windows endpoint
Yeah,
device. Yeah. So you have to delegate access to that local administrator to a particular person for tracking. So you cannot
yeah,
do this in a standard OAuth environment.
yeah. And we see this also. There's a company called Passbolt. I'd love to get them on the live stream. They're based in I think Luxembourg. Um, And they have a privileged access management system that's focused on developers and developer requirements. Because a lot of times you're in a small development team, somebody signs up for a test account, they need to share their credentials. So there are real PAM requirements um, that I think that PAM can be about solving business problems and making teams more productive, and that's why that's never going
But
to go
but that,
away.
that's completely outside the definition of PAM. If you go to Gartner or Kuppinger,
Hmm.
they wouldn't classify that as PAM. So
Um,
developers, no.
Passport says they're these are shared accounts, so that by definition means they're privileged. But um,
Yeah,
and so but the thing is that no matter how you look at it, no PAM solution it's not a total solution for all your applications. It
absolutely.
doesn't. Yeah. So is it worth the investment if wouldn't it be better to say, I know all of my applications are using CEDAR policies, and therefore I can make these statements about security rather than have saying each one of my applications is a one-off for security, including the PAM, which just groups a bunch of one-offs. And therefore I have no operational leverage. And so I'm just going to say, yes, it's all secure when I have no idea.
But why is it an either or? Um, obviously, having these, well, I assume I don't know Cedar, but probably it's kind of the new Xacomol or something like that.
Yeah, it's you
Uh,
could say it's there's a policy syntax and a policy engine.
mhm.
But yeah, the main thing is that the syntax has a schema, and I don't know if Zachmal defined schema. I think it just
It
defined
does,
the
yeah.
yeah. So you can
But
define your
Xacomol is
schema and
horrendously complex. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's like I think of it like LDAP. You define your objects with their properties,
Hmm.
and then you define the policies about those objects. And because
Right.
you defined your schema and said these are possible things, you can actually iterate through all the possible combinations,
Yeah.
make sure there are no corner cases. Um, yeah, and so I think, like I said at the beginning, maybe these PAM systems can adopt. My problem comes like in the interface between applications that are using a PAM, um,
But sorry, why
or
would an application, well, uh, do you think that every infrastructure service is an application or application in the sense of a web application or
yeah,
an
every
ERP system?
infrastructure service is just an application, and it's a workload, you could
Okay,
say.
so yeah, I have to be aware that we have a slightly different terminology, but that's okay. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, there's not
Uh,
enough words in identity management and security, so we all use the same words to mean different things. Um,
yes.
so yeah, I just see the desktop login service or the Radius login service. I just see that as an application because it has a specific
Mhm.
identity. Hopefully, we're able to identify it asymmetrically, and then it interacts with users. So it can present assertions from users. That, I authenticated this user. Now I'm calling this API.
Yeah.
You
But it
mentioned.
won't. Your solution is nice to manage the authorizations, but it won't serve the system separation and endpoint hardening requirements. So
Password PAM.
an attacker out to steal a Kerberos token or grab some authorization ticket still wouldn't be prevented by your authorization system to do that. He would just steal the identity and go ahead.
Well, so Cedar is neutral on access control systems. Actually, it doesn't say how you should do any of that. It just says how you define the schema and the policies.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, the access control system should be based on the tokens. The tokens provide the evidence of the principle, um, there could be tokens from multiple issuers that give you different information and context that would enable you to feed that into policy to make a decision. That's
Mm-hmm.
my personal preference. But I wanted to go back to a different area, which is that privilege access management used to be in the old days about like sharing the password. Like you store, it's almost like the password vault for. Do you agree that that was the origin? And do you think that that origin influenced how the tool has evolved over the years?
Yeah, for some companies, definitely. So I don't call names, but at the top of my head, some companies are from this password vault area. Yes.
And so
But
that was sort of
but
the orientation. Like we want to, okay, so maybe we don't just want to be a password vault and we want to put some other process around this. But do
right.
you think that that impacted the design of modern PAM systems today?
Well, I'm a little bit split about the modern design. So I've worked with a few,
Hmm.
and behind the scenes, you see the remainders of various acquisitions.
Yeah, what's left?
um, but I have seen rather modern systems as well, um, which really try to have this kind of mathematical proof. So, for example, if you inject a secret into a file system, so you don't want to store a secret on a persistent file system, they underneath change the file system, and by magic, your application, your let's say your database will have access to that password or SSH key. So um, there is some magic sauce to make these things happen. Um,
Uh,
uh, but to and well, let me just deviate and catch up. You said you have this proof in the CEDAR system. Another system that is kind of cryptographically proven is the good old X509. And it's overly complex, but
or RBAC. RBAC is deterministic. RBAC, you can always say at this time, if this person had this role, he had access, right? Um, the
it's
RBAC is,
frequently a bearer token. The
well,
thing
so
is
the
about authenticity, bearer tokens are not so secure.
um, do you think, I want to finish where we started. Do you think that maybe CyberArk saw the writing on the wall and said, we've hit the peak of this architecture, and we see that the architecture is going a different way? Now that there's advances in policy syntax, and now that there's AI, like it's like our time's passed and it's time to get out. So let's you know good time
Well,
to
to
sell.
be honest, I haven't seen this kind of vision which you have with the vendors to have this
Hmm.
standardized policy thing. The best thing they are getting is um, to have some standard provisioning from an IGA system.
Mm-hmm.
And this, as I said, you're much further in the future. Um, so if you're looking from a regulatory perspective, I know I have a better insight into European standards. So there is a NIS 2 regulation, National Critical Infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
and the DORA for financial services. And these systems clearly require you to do administrative access from highly secure systems. Well, the phrasing is not like that, but you're not allowed to use your standard notebook to access your SAP financial database or Linux server.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have some kind of privileged access workstation or a PAM system. There is no way around, and within a few years, all um, auditors will learn that, and then and you see it. People are buying CyberArk and their competitors like crazy. So for a couple of years, I don't see this market going down.
Yeah, my future vision might be 25 or 30 years in advance if it happens at all.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
do you
But we
see?
have AI and other things which may make things look different in a couple of years.
Yeah, but those guys have a $25 billion incentive to do their due diligence and figure out if now if maybe Mike is right. So maybe it is.
Right.
I actually wanted to go full circle. In the beginning, you said that Gartner was thought this market was mature, but you maybe think otherwise. Do you think is this market not mature? It seems pretty mature to me, but $25 billion. But why is it not mature?
Um, in a mature market, I would say you have very standardized regulations, standardized, excuse me, standardized workflows, technology blueprints, and products which are fairly stable and not interesting anymore. And when I see the tenders and requirement specifications and actually deployments here in Europe, there is still a big gap. There has been investment for the last 5 to 10 years, but it's still the maturity level in that area is, I would say, even for the large companies, it's on a scale from 1 to 5. It's I would say in the average around 3, going slowly towards 4, and yeah,
Do you think that the current participants maybe haven't innovated fast enough? Because
yes.
if it, yeah, you would say,
The threat landscape was growing much faster than expected. And people have different problems as well. So it's always a limited budget. You have to do cloud virtualization.
AI.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty new, but even from a IT infrastructure perspective, there are so many things to do to integrate, to monitor, to have new workstation concepts like cloud-based, etc. So PAM is just one of many topics.
Last thoughts before we kind of went over a little bit, but any last thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I would say still um, do a proper. Most companies will need PAM and derive, and I think from a security point of view, these are really low-hanging fruits. But you need to have a good solid concept before you start purchasing a product or migrating something, and have a good roadmap.
Okay. And I just want to quickly announce next week's episode. Um, And we go to the pigeons. Actually, we've been meaning to do this for a while, but we're having an episode on Janssen Project. Yay! That's the Janssen's the upstream open source project for GlueFlex. Um, and we're going to have on Dhaval Desai, who's a community manager. He's great. And yeah, I think it'll be a fun episode for me at least. I won't have to do too much homework. Um, so with that, I'll say thank you, audience. Thank you, Reiner, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.